When you stand in front of this painting by Claude Monet, you're drawn in by the beautiful flowers, how he's been able to capture their beauty and the variation in the color into this impressionist painting that was done with blobs of paint and smears here and there. But you have to keep in mind that the world didn't used to be that way. About 400 million years ago, the first plants emerged on the planet Earth. About 250 million years ago, we saw the first flowering plants. Before the flowering plants, the world was dull. It was green and brown and not nearly as interesting as it is now. 125 million years ago, there was an explosion of flowering plants, different species, different colors, different forms and shapes, along with an explosion in the different varieties of bees. Bees and flowers co-evolved. The bees augmented the speciation of the flowers, leading to their great diversity, and the flowers in turn did the same for the bees. So they co-evolved. We had this explosion of bees and bee types and flowers and flowering types. If you look at this field of wildflowers, this is on the side of a hill in the coastal mountain ranges of California in the spring. But you see the beautiful patches of flowers that look as if they were painted by Claude Monet with splotches of paint, blobs of different colors put up on the landscape that could have been drawn from his palette, the painter's palette. But these flowers, these colors were drawn from the palette of the honeybee. The palette of the honeybee is the pollen that it collects from flowers and transfers to other flowers that form seeds that then fall to the ground and form these different patches of flowers that you see. So the pollen is the palette, and the honeybee is the artist that paints the landscapes that we see. Bees not only transformed the landscape from brown and green into marvelous colors and beautiful flowers, it's also done the same with respect to agriculture. It has changed the face of agriculture, it has changed the look of agriculture over the last 100 years, especially. For instance, these almond orchards in California are there only because of the pollination activities of honeybees. Honeybees pollinate these trees and make them profitable to grow in the Central Valley. When I first started working with almond growers in the early 1990s, there were about 400,000 of acres under cultivation in primarily the Central Valley of California. Today, there's over 1 million. It has become a huge crop. It has become a huge business enterprise. And when you drive the length of the Central Valley, 500 miles, you see orchard after orchard after orchard of almonds. And in bloom in the spring, they are spectacular like this. Other crops are also dependent on honeybees, especially the sunflowers. And the beautiful crops that you see today are pollinated by bees, and especially seed alfalfa. Seed alfalfa is really important when you think about it. Bees pollinate the seed alfalfa. The alfalfa produces the seeds that get planted. The crops are grown. The crops are fed to cattle. The cattle then either provide beef or the cattle provide milk. The milk then provides ice cream that's sold at the baseball game. So you can see it's a far-reaching effect that their pollination activities have on us and our environment. Bees communicate the locations of the patches in which they're foraging. So bees go out and they forage on patches of flowers. They come back from where they've been foraging and they do this dance. It's called a waggle dance. The waggle dance gives information about the direction to the source where the bee was and the distance. The bees attending this dance can decipher that information and then fly out to that source. There they can pollinate the plants. They bring back nectar and pollen, but they pollinate the plants. The plants produce seeds. The seeds drop, and that forms these patches of plants of different colors that are shown on the landscape pictures that I just showed. We can decipher the language of the dance as well. The bee does her dance on the vertical surface of a comb, those wax combs. She dances on the surface of it. And if you look at these diagrams, they show a direction. So you saw that figure 8 they're making. They turn, they go through the middle, they waggle, they turn, they go through the middle, they waggle. Well, the direction in which they're doing that waggle gives the information about where the resource is located. That's the direction. The timing that it takes them to go through this straight run portion, the speed with which they do it, gives information about the distance to the source. We, as observers, can look at these dances and we know where the bees are foraging. We can decipher it, and we can go there and we can find those patches of flowers on which the bees that are performing the dance are foraging. The process is one of brush strokes on the landscape. The way that they do those brush strokes on the landscape is discovering different patches of flowers, recruiting bees to go there and pollinate them in the seed drop. And there's a simple mechanism by which this occurs. First of all, the bees go out and they discover a patch of flowers. And an individual bee might start foraging on this resource, visiting different flowers. While they're foraging, they get information about the sweetness, the taste. Sweeter means more sugar. More sugar means more value to that resource. The purity. If it's contaminated, they don't like it as well. If it's uncontaminated, it gives them a higher value, a perceived value of that resource. Load weight. If they tank up with a great big heavy load and they have to fly back to the nest, then that's good. If they've been out there a long time and they don't have much load weight, then that's not so good. So they get this perceived value of the value of the resource. If it's closer to the nest, it's more valuable than if it's further away, because it takes less energy to fly to something close than to fly further away. So the net gain in energy back to the nest is better the closer it is. The fragrance of those flowers smell beautiful to us, but the flowers aren't making it for us. The flowers are making the fragrance for the bees. It's attractive to them, and the floral fragrances are a very important component of the perceived value of the resource. Shape of the flower is important. The flow rate, the rate at which the nectar, the speed with which they can collect a full load. If you have to visit a whole lot of flowers, it takes a long time. That's not as good as you only have to visit a few flowers and you can take up your full tank of nectar to go back to the nest. And they also, like us, any quality that's going up, that's improving, is more attractive to them than the quality going down. If it's becoming sweeter and more flow over the day, the value that they put on that resource increases over the day. So once they get this assessment of this perceived value of the resource, they go back to the nest. They fly home and they come into the nest and they enter with, let's say, a perceived value of a certain amount. They say that resource is worth this much. That's what they've determined it to be on the basis of these set of criteria. Then they unload. Other bees come up to them and unload them. They take their load from them. And these receiver bees are called. As they unload these bees as they're coming in, the bees are sitting there and their clock is running. So they've got this clock going and it's like, okay, how long is this taking for me to unload? As the clock runs, the longer the clock runs, the less they value the load. So as time goes on, their perceived value goes lower and lower and lower and lower. If it takes them too long to unload, then they're no longer really excited about what they came back with. So this line here shows that as the perceived value goes down, there's a point at which it hits a threshold. So an individual forager in her own assessment of the value of the resource, she might have a dance threshold. If their perceived value gets below her threshold, she won't dance. She won't recruit. If she doesn't dance and recruit these bees, then in time that resource will have fewer and fewer and fewer bees visiting it as a consequence of there being no real excitement about it. However, if she perceives the value to be very high and she gets unloaded very quickly, then in this area here, she'll do a dance. She'll dance and recruit. In fact, the greater the distance between the threshold, her dance threshold, and her perceived value when she offloads that nectar, the more vigorously she'll dance. So that means that basically resources that have the highest value as perceived by the foragers will end up having more individuals foraging, indicating that resource, the direction and the distance to it, than those that have less value. So the workforce will shift and move into those patches that are more valuable. By this mechanism, this simple one mechanism, colonies look like they're making foraging decisions. There's no individual telling them anything. It's all self-organized. There's no individual that's saying this is better than that. But just through this simple mechanism, colonies redistribute their foraging forces towards those resources that are more valuable and away from those that are less valuable. One study that was conducted showed that, actually took an observation hive where you can watch bees doing the dance on the comb because it has glass sides. They took individual bees who were dancing, and they decoded the dance direction and distance and then plotted it on a map. So each of these dots on this map here show the places where the bees were foraging that were being observed dancing on the comb of this observation hive. The different colors, so here's yellow, here's a clump of black and gray and black. The different colors indicate different resources. So the bees are foraging on something that they return with yellow pollen or black pollen. Those are different sources or species or plant types that they're foraging on. Over time, these are different days, from one day to the next, you can see the shift. Here, this is primarily in this direction. This is more central, closer to the nest, and then this is in another direction. These shifts took place over a series of 3 days. And those shifts represent the reassignment of foraging force by this colony from less valuable resources to more valuable resources. So through their activities, bees have changed the face of the earth for ourselves and for them as well.